Oh, hi everyone, and welcome to our 91st event. Pretty exciting that we're on our 91st event after just starting, a year and a half ago about, so pretty cool. You may have noticed that there's a slight role reversal today. So usually I'm behind the scenes and Mei is up here interviewing our authors, but today Mei is our author and I get to interview her. So this month we read Travels Through Dali with a Leg of Ham for our November book club pick. And for anyone that's new, thank you for joining. And I know a lot of you are old faces, well, not old, but old to us. So thank you for being with us every month. And we hope to see you next month as well in our final book club of the year. So just a quick word on logistics. Mei has a collection of photos and stories to kick things off with. So we'll start with that. And then we'll open it up to Q&A. I have a few questions of my own, but we also encourage you to share any questions you have either in the chat or the Q&A box. If you submitted a question in advance, I have that here, so I will read that out. Yeah, so that's how the event will work. I think to give Mei a short introduction, I think she probably doesn't need one. I think most of us know who she is, but I'll give her one nonetheless. So Mei is the founder of WildChina, which has officially been running trips focusing on sustainable travel to all corners of China for over 20 years now, which is awesome. And Mei is originally from Yunnan, first in Dali and then later in Kunming, which she talks about in the book. She now lives in Berkeley, California with her family, but at the moment she is in Shanghai quarantining. So sort of an interesting situation for our book club today. We're very happy to have her with us, and hopefully you're getting a bit of a break from your isolation, Mei. So yeah, I think Mei, I'll hand things over to you. And if you don't mind, I think everyone might be interested to hear how your recent trip to China went and how quarantine is going and what it's like. So yeah, over to you.
Thank you, Kendra. You could see me still sort of like running around a little bit, trying to prop up my desk. It's not my usual spot in Berkeley, but I can't complain. I think, look, I have a very posh room. They moved to me and everything's working really well. And the initial landing is a bit of a adjustment, a bit of a shock to the system. And, you know, in America, everyone's walking around almost without masks now. And you arrive, the first person who greets you is in full hazmat suit. And from there on, everyone who meets you is in that suit. So you never get to see anybody to full face. I haven't seen anybody until now with Kendra. And, but other than that shock, once you get into a hotel, it's actually very comfortable. How often do you get 2 weeks uninterrupted service brought to your door? You know, breakfast, lunch, they knock on the door and then there's the takeout boxes right in front. I rush out to say thank you and they've already disappeared. I don't know how they can be that fast. So I never see anybody. But it's outside of my window. I have a park. It's a park sort of made for Chinese families, you know, kids playground and rides in the distance and trees. And it's lovely, actually. So I'm enjoying this. Don't tell my husband. He's there toiling with the kids drop off and pick up. And I'm here just resting. Can't complain.
That's wonderful. I wanted to ask actually, how was it? How did you transfer hotels? Like, how did they go about doing that? Because Mei was previously in another hotel and then she just switched today. So yeah, how did they move you around?
Not voluntarily. They put me in a ambulance. They actually, seriously, one ambulance just for me to pick me up and ferried me across town. The reason being, it's too long, a complicated story, because I previously said I was going to go to see our WildChina studio in Zhejiang. And so that's a designated spot for those departing for Zhejiang. And then I found out all the officials in Zhejiang that I was supposed to meet are not willing to meet me until I've been in the country for 28 days. And I said, 28 days, I don't have that much. I'm going back to Shanghai. Well, I'm staying in Shanghai. And so they said, now you're now you belong to the crew that stays in Shanghai, that's in a different hotel. So you have to move. And so I packed up and they sent an ambulance and we drove through red lights. I've never done that in my life. And it was pretty exciting. So here I am in a different hotel.
Okay, that's pretty cool. Yeah. I guess that's a good situation to be in an ambulance in China. It's a pretty cool experience.
I haven't had that before, neither in the
Wow.
US nor here. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Cool. And so how much longer do you have in your quarantine then?
10 more days, but I'm telling you, time is in the warp. It's sort of, if you thought the past 2 years of COVID disappeared and you don't really know where the time went, this is more exaggerated because the day in, day out just like whoo, disappears into a hole. And I almost missed this morning's talk because somehow I lost track. This is Friday in China. So in any event, I'm glad I'm here and I'm glad to see everybody. If anyone needs more suggestions or want to follow my trip, I'm actually trying to post pretty regularly on Instagram. It's WildChina Mei. I know Helen and I have had a couple of exchanges there. But anyway, let's move on to my travel to Yunnan, shall we?
Cool. Yeah. Let me get the PowerPoint pulled up and you can go ahead.
Great. So we were a bit concerned. Are you going to be sharing? Yeah, we were, Kendra and I were concerned about the Wi-Fi connection. So she's going to be running the slides and I will talk. This is a book that I wrote in 2015 and came out in 2016. And it's one of those weird books that when I first started, I said, is it a travel log or is it a cookbook? What is it? So when I talked to publishers, they really wanted me to define it. And I said, it's both. And they said, well, they can't be both because we have challenges shelving the book. We don't know whether to shelf it on the travel section or food section. I said, why not both? And so eventually we sort of discussed and it came out and I still don't know where it's shelved, maybe a special category, but it is a journey through Dali. And I will show you what Dali looks like. Many of you probably have been there already, and I'll talk a little bit about why I wrote the book. Shall we roll the first slide? So that's hometown for me. The area in red is Yunnan province, and that little white dot is Dali Old Town. And many of you already know Dali Old Town is now one of the very famous tourist sites in China. But when I was growing up, it was this little dingy gray little town that nobody really knew. And it's sort of in this interesting corner of the world, as you can see on the map. To the west, it's immediately another 400 kilometers, it's Myanmar. And to the northwest, it stretches into the Tibetan mountains. And south is Laos. Straight north, we didn't write down here, straight north of Yunnan province is Sichuan province. So the whole area has this very interesting influence from China, coming from Beijing, northeast area, and Sichuan. That's all very Chinese. And influence from the west is sort of Myanmar, Laos, and Thailand, South Thailand or Laos. That area is very Southeast Asian. So it's a very interesting, different feel from Beijing, Shanghai. And I always say, if you really want to understand China, spend some time in Beijing, but go to these borderlands because you see a different culture. 25 of China's 55 ethnic groups are all found in Yunnan. And of course, it's also known as the Kingdom of Flora and Fauna. Recently, by the way, there's a National Geographic author called Paul Salopek. He's actually walking through this area. So if you follow him both on Twitter or Instagram, it's called Walk Out of Eden Walk or something like Out of Eden. And he's walking through Gaoligo Mountains, and he came up with these amazing statistics that I didn't really examine before. And also he has videos showcasing the area. That would give you a good sense of what the area was like. Next slide, please. So this is what Dali looks like. But when I was there, when I was growing up there, I didn't think that was beautiful, special at all. Not at all. It's perfect weather year round. It's kind of like Berkeley from the 50s to the 70s. It doesn't really get very cold. When it snows, everyone just goes crazy and say like, oh my God, this is like once in a lifetime opportunity to touch snow. It was so special. So nearby town of Kunming is called the Spring City. But I really didn't quite like the weather. And that's one of the main reasons I left, because it was too much in one zone. It's in one band. And I felt like to build character, you need to have, the snow blizzard from the Mongolian plains, like, that shapes character. But Yunnan people kind of like lukewarm, like year round, they're very comfortable. We actually have a term for Yunnan people. We call ourselves 家乡宝, which means homebody. Because no one wants to leave. It's too comfortable. Why bother with a strange land and discomfort of visiting other places? But I didn't like that concept. So that's why I left, right? Next slide, please. And, I love this. This is, of course, tea drinking and smoking with the water pipe. The tea in Dali has the 3-course tea. So in Yunnan, in the south, tea is produced in Pu'er, Xishuangbanna area, and there are different ways of drinking tea, and tea leaves are even used pickled and cooked in food. And in Dali area, the 3-course tea, one of the courses is a spice tea. And it sort of reminds me of almost Indian chai, another course that they even put cheese in the tea. It's very, it's a fusion culture. And when you go along this path further north, the path is called Chamagudal, Tea Horse Road. You get into the Tibetan area where they drink the yak butter tea, right? Just following the tea culture alone, Yunnan is already very different from what you see in Guangdong or Fujian area. But I show this picture to show you another side of Yunnan people. It's the lifestyle. In Yunnan, there's a word called 晒太阳, which means basking under the sun. And that is literally an activity. 晒太阳 is a major activity. What are you doing? 晒太阳. You do nothing. You just sit under the sun to stay warm in wintertime because we don't have heating inside. And it just shows you the kind of leisurely attitude. Everyone's sort of 晒太阳 most of the time. I have a good friend of mine, Gloria Pengying, who I think she's in here. She'll tell you more. Anyway, let's go to the next slide. Now, when it comes to food, very picky. My dad never had fridge until 1995. I think that's after I came back from HBS. I said, you need a fridge because I need to drink Coke at 3 degrees Celsius. That's when I bought a fridge for him. But before that, he never had a fridge because everyone just walks to the market, the pig, they literally sell the pig like that. Well, you don't have to buy a whole pig like that. But people would all pick on the meat, pick on the pieces of vegetable. My dad would tell me, when you buy a cucumber, you have to look for the tip, the end of where you picked the cucumber off the vine. If it has sort of like a little jelly-like, I don't know how to describe it, at the end of the tip, that's the secretion from the plant when you pluck it off. If that's still soft, that means the cucumber was picked this morning. That's the only type he would buy, right? So anything from the fridge, 不新鲜了, not fresh. So I thought, my God, this is so incredibly inefficient because you have to go to market every day. And only now, I live in Berkeley, and there's a famous restaurant nearby called Chez Panisse. And so people are a lot talking about farm-to-table meals. This is the new Californian cuisine, or from boat to table, all these kind of concept of eating fresh. I think Yunnan people practices that every day. I hope it's still now. I mean, large parts it's still now, but somewhere in the cities, they can't do it anymore. So those were all the things that I didn't like about Yunnan that you can roll, that I had to leave, right? You look at the next slide that Kendra was showing you, this is the ancient stage in Shaxi. It's a stage where the caravan, T-horse road caravans would come to rest. And in the evenings, they have entertainment and performances on that stage. It was renovated in the early 2000s. But this is representative of a lot of the buildings and villages along the T-horse road throughout Yunnan. And I always looked at them and thinking, yeah, they are interesting to look at, but they're terrible to live in. They don't have fresh plumbing. They no hot water. The insulation to the outside is terrible, so it's always cold. And when I was in college, many of the American students would say, "Oh, these should be preserved," and I always thought, 站着说话不腰疼. How do you translate that? Like you're talking, 坐着说话不腰疼. You're talking about it while you're sitting down, so you don't feel the backache. Meaning, I felt, people wanted to have a better life. People wanted to have an apartment that has indoor plumbing. So why is stopping us from developing? Only later on, after leaving all these beautiful buildings, I come back full circle. I apologize. Let me just get out of this. Yeah, so that it doesn't go on ding-dongy. Coming back full circle to realize these things truly, if we don't preserve them, they're going to disappear. And interestingly enough, it's probably the distance that created the beauty that I left Yunnan, came back and traveled there. I realized people there are very generous with their time. Every time I went back, my aunt, my dad, my brothers, I was the center of the universe. Even my friends, everyone would give me the most precious thing, time. They would say, "Oh, you want to go to that park? I'll go with you." Or if you want to go somewhere, if you want to do something, I'll go with you. There was never, it always seemed like they have nothing to do. So they always wanted to tag along. The truth is, it's not that they're not busy. There's this hospitality. They felt like someone coming back or returning, or a guest who's arriving at my doorstep should always be greeted with this hospitality. And that warmth, every time I go back, I always feel more nourished. And I said, what about Yunnan makes me feel this way? And so I really wanted to write a book to really explore. And at the time when I was thinking about writing this book, I said, okay, what do I really like about Yunnan? Yes, the people, but it's hard to talk about the people without a link that links all the story together. And food was the common link that we decided on. I was discussing this with my team. And what type of food? Two types of food that I'm fascinated with. One is mushroom. Yunnan has endless amount of foraged mushroom. In fact, I think it's like 60% of all the foraged mushroom types in China are all found in Yunnan, maybe a higher percentage. I was just reading that yesterday. Another type is ham. Now, ham was even more interesting to me. It's not as precious as mushroom, but it's something that we never had enough when I was growing up. We always had a pound of pork to share among all the family members. It was never enough. And my brothers and I would fight for these little jewels. They're chopped up into tiny little pieces. They're never, ever served like in America's Thanksgiving, these big chunks, big slices on a platter. No, that one slice served on the American platter would be chopped up into these tiny sort of like pea-sized pieces and stir-fried with garlic scapes or broccoli, whatever. You just toss a little bit in and it adds this flavor, it just like explodes. The dish comes alive with the ham. So ham, but we never had an entire leg of ham. It was always a little bit. Or a leg you would hang on the wall, you would eat it throughout the whole year because the weather wasn't too hot and they will always stay, right? So because of that, in my little mind, I always thought ham was the sign of prosperity. And now I can afford a leg of ham. Maybe I should write about ham. So that's what I did. And I bought a leg of ham. I'll show you where I got it, and cut it up into these chunks of more than a pound a piece. And I took that with me, went on this journey, a loop journey around Changshan Mountain, all in the Dali prefecture. Dali is one of the prefectures, by this beautiful lake in any event. So I went around this mountain for a week and met with old friends, new friends. They came from all walks of life, restaurant owners or farmers. And I just handed them a chunk of ham and said, hey, can you cook this for me? And I'm trying to write a recipe. And so they said, okay, come into my kitchen. And honestly, being invited into people's kitchen is the heart of the home, right? So all the conversations opened up. They would tell me their troubles with their children in school, their troubles with their ailing mother, or medical care fees going too high, hospital costs too high. And the conversations in the end would just show you people are all the same. It really doesn't matter whether you live in New York, Berkeley, or Yunnan, the same kind of concerns, except, it's in a different setting. So that's how I anchored the book, is through this chunk of ham. I got a recipe from each household, and I got to write about them. Now let's meet a few of them. This is Lao Yang, and almost everyone in Dali is last named Yang. You're going to see that soon. And look at his face. I just love the color. I think he's fairly young. He's probably in his late 40s, early 50s, probably. But you can see the sun-drenched color in him, right? And his hands, super, super capable. And that's the leg of ham that I bought from him. He has 3 sons, which is quite unusual. And by the way, the village I went to, this is in Yunnan, just at the foot of Northern Village, which is more known in China because of a TV series called A Bite of China. It's a TV series on Netflix as well. You can follow them to eat around China. This village is right there. And in his village, the unusual thing is all the young people are still there. His 3 sons are still there. And you're going to meet some of them soon. Next slide. So I bought a leg of ham. At the same time, I said, can you show me how to curate a leg of ham? And when I arrived, they have this big chunk of meat, and they just yanked it out of the big bucket and sort of threw it onto this table, cleaned it. And what he was doing there was he sharpened the chopsticks to puncture holes in the meat, and then rubbed with a corn alcohol to disinfect it. Then it was just heaps of generous amount of salt and rubbed on top of the ham. This area also produces mountain salt. They are drawn from the wells in the mountains and distilled. The brine is distilled into salt. So it's not super, super white. And they glue together. They can be shaped into these cylinders, so packed into baskets and put onto horsebacks to transport up to Tibet. But so he uses a mix of those local salt as well as commercially bought salt with iodine to rub it. Next step. And you can see, I just love the color of his hands. And honestly, if you and I, normal people go and rub this, your hands are going to burn because of the salt, right? But they are so used to it. From all the salt, the ham makers that I've visited, nobody wears gloves. They just do this by hand. And once you do that, they're rubbed, they're hung up. Actually, they're piled together in the corner first, and they put a huge stone on top. Every winter, like December-ish, they would do this. They would put a huge rock on top to provide the weight, like 3 or 4 legs stacked together. Then the liquid would leak out from the legs. They would collect all of them, boil them, and they would dry off into salt again. They would apply the salt back onto the ham and do that for about a week. Then they hang it up in their houses. Traditionally, in traditional Chinese homes, they hang it close to the fire pit. They normally have a fire pit in the house. It's not very healthy, honestly, because when they light a fire locally, the smoke would come out. It's not good for your lung, but it's good for curing the ham that's hung above it. And so they would just hang it there for a year, 2 years, 3 years would be ideal. And the locals would tell me if it's 3 years old, age 3 years, then you can eat raw. Anything less than that, they would always cook it. Next one. Right. And so I think my ham was 2 years old. This is one of his sons. These are his 2 sons, actually. And I just love the way he always has a cigarette dangling there. And he comes with it. You can see the hoof, holding onto the hoof of the leg. And it has this, over 2 years, a layer of this white, black mold on top of the ham. And the way of waking it up, this was a way that I used the word to wake it up. And they just say like, 要解开, to open it up. But in order to eat it, that's the first thing they do is they char it on the fire. Char it into like pitch black. Next slide, you will see. And then you soak it in cold spring water with one of these, what do you call those? Steel wool? Yeah, they just rub. And then this golden layer of skin shows up. It removes the mold. And if there's any remaining particles of hair or whatever, it gets removed at this time. Once it comes out of the bath, after scrubbing, it's this beautiful golden shiny piece. Next slide. Now it's the test of skills. As you can see there too, they don't have the American sort of saws that you normally see at a butcher. They have the same tools. The picture on the left, the guy has a cleaver that is used for normal cooking. And the thing in his right hand is for cutting firewood. Those are all he has. But the test of skills is like the men, a lot of men from the village all come and surrounded us, watching us dissecting this piece of ham. And he hacks it. A few hacks, you should have a very clean cut. And once you cut, they pick up the dissection and show everybody. And then they will say like, oh, it's a clean cut. Oh, it's not very good. Oh, Lao Yang, you need to practice your skills. And it was really interesting. It's a village affair and it's a competition of their cutting skills. And then the picture on the right, they're slicing it into a dish for us. You can see the layer of fat, the marble. I really like it. It's very tasty. You have to eat it with the skin, with the fat. All right, next picture. So what I found interesting is the further you are from the source of ham production, the more precious the meat is, obviously. And so the people further away in cities would eat ham sparingly because it's salty. It probably isn't that healthy. And so, like I mentioned earlier, you use a small piece and chop it up and with more vegetables simply to add flavor. But the closer you go to the source of ham production, the more unadulterated version of ham eating becomes. It becomes more like the Americans. They would have a chunk and just slice it up, steamed, a whole bowl of meat served like that, a whole bowl of ham. And the closer to the source, the more abundant meat you get. And the way we eat, that's the same spot where we just cooked the ham. And they just bring out this little table, little stools. We sat around and in the courtyard. I just loved all this. All my meals were like that. But I have to tell you, after a week of ham eating, I was done. Anyway, the first few meals were delicious. But it's just great. Like kids, old people, young people, everyone, villagers who's passing by, everyone's invited. It seems like adding a pair of chopsticks, inviting someone to dinner isn't complex at all. It's just adding a pair of chopsticks. Next. Now, as I traveled along, I took the ham, and this is one of the folk song king that I went to meet. And his name is Li Genfan, and he lives in a village by Shaxi. He's known for the best voice, so he sings. And the lady on the left, on his right, accompanies him in duets. They would sing folk songs for everything, for weddings, funerals, harvest, salt carrying, baby's birth, everything. There's a song. Even actually, there's a song to spread messages from Xi Jinping. Whatever. Yes, there's a song for every occasion. And the reason folk song singing is so popular is because when you think about Yunnan's mountains, they're very steep. The valleys are, the canyons are steep. And there's a saying that you can sing to someone across the mountain, but it will take you a day and night to get there because you have to hike down and hike up into that village. And so it's very much a form that people use to communicate in the farm fields or dating. And Bai people's folk songs sometimes are, at times I think it's almost pornography. And so it's just amazing. I don't understand Bai language, so they have to translate for me. It's sort of like, I was just pretty shocked when they translated the lyrics to me. I only quoted 2 songs in the book, and not the juicy ones, sadly. But you'd have to come there and they will translate these for you. Let's give it a listen, maybe just for 10, 15 seconds. Oh, does it have sound?
Yeah, sorry, 1 second. Let me, sorry, I didn't click the right settings.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. Okay, here we go.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So do you see the musical instrument in his hands? And that in Chinese is called Sentient, 3 strings. And I asked them, I said, what is this? And he has a sort of one of his singing troupe members, and a funny guy who looked like Elvis. He was in the book as well. And he told me, he said, it's 爱情冲锋枪, which means it's a love rifle. And I thought that was pretty hilarious how he how they interpret their culture. Let's keep moving on. Thank you. So as I traveled along, I went to sort of west of the mountain, north of the mountain, and now I'm going down to south of the mountain. And this is in Weishan area. I went to visit a restaurant owner and a pickle lady, and all the ingredients on the left is for making this incredible dish called chao er kuai. And the dish in the middle, the white little pieces, that is a kind of rice noodle. A lot of you may have heard of them. Chinese love noodles. Actually, most people love noodles, I would say, but it's a version of wheat noodle in the north. In the south, it's rice noodle. And when you call it noodle, I think of it as stringy. But in this particular area in Yunnan, we make a kind of noodle, is the closest translation I could get, but it more looks like a brick of rice dough, but it's pounded very hard brick. And when you are ready to eat it, you thinly slice it and cut into little pieces. It is made with rice and it is chewy. It's a little bit like the Korean sort of mochi omelets thing you can get in the supermarket. I apologize. I have to answer this because this is quarantine checkup. Kendra, if you want to play the music, see?
Sure. I'll play the rest of the folk song. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to start typing them in for when Mei gets back.
I apologize. That was a COVID test.
No worries. Perfect timing.
It was a COVID test, and they were very quick. I said, I'm on this in a session, and they just like stuck the two real deep. Okay. All right. Where was I? So we're talking about this rice noodle and our kwai, and it's fried. See, you can see some pickles, a ham, and garlic chive, snow pea leaves, and some napa cabbage. And so in Yunnan cooking, there's always a lot of greens because of the climate. We have greens year round, and these garlic chive and snow peas and napa cabbage always available. And the kind of pickled mustard greens always available. That's like, this picture is basically the essentials of Yunnan cooking. And anyone coming there, you will try that. Now, this lady on the right, this picture, this old lady, back then when I wrote the book, she was 79. So she must be 85 now. And she just keeps working. And she is, to me, a classic image of a Yunnan woman. And in fact, all the women that I wrote about in the book are very typical, because I was talking to Paul Solopek, the National Geographic walker, and he said something. He said, Yunnan is carried on the shoulders of women. And I thought, spot on. He really touched on one of the most fundamental cultural phenomena of Yunnan, is women in Yunnan work extremely hard. This lady, she started the business herself in her 50s, making pickles, and she's still there, and she probably will work all the way until maybe the last month on the deathbed. And she employed her son, her daughters, and she would tell me they make pickles, different pickles in different seasons, depending on what's coming off the field. Right now it's string beans. Another season it would be chilies. Another season it would be daikons. And they are constantly working. But the phenomena of women running all small sorts of businesses is the same in my family. My aunts, all of them, do all the cooking and the business running. I love my dad, but it's not say, it's the women who are working around the clock. You see it in city, you see it in villages, you see it everywhere. And that's one thing I wanted the book to celebrate. Next slide. This is my favorite uncle, Yang Mao. And he knew me since I was born, since I was a baby, but I haven't seen him for many, many years. So he and my dad were colleagues at the hydropower station along the Xia River. And he's now retired. He never left the area where I lived. So this was literally the area I was living. And on the side of a mountain, it's very steep, but wherever he could carve out a small little piece, maybe a 3 feet, square feet, little piece of flat area, he would plant something. So he has his organic garden all sort of scattered in these little pieces of plots of land around the apartment building. And in order to save water, he also set up a water system that would take water from his washing machine. That he has a valve. The first round of soapy water goes into the drain. And the second round, he would turn the valve, and then the water would go through this piping system. You see that on the wall behind, on top of his head, not here. It would come into the field, and he dug a pond to save all the water from washing dishes, washing vegetable, washing clothes, for irrigation. And so it's completely organic, and he's very proud. He tells me he never spends a penny to buy vegetable, and he plays chess in all his spare time. And it was also like being invited into his house. You could also see the dynamics of how it changes between him. And when his wife showed up, he immediately became very quiet. He never spoke once his wife showed up. And so it's sort of like this intimacy that you have in people's kitchen, in people's home, that I hoped to capture. And it was just lovely just spending time with him. peeling these fava beans. In Yunnan, there's always, all of these cooking chores are done by hand, I think in most households. But we would just sit there and peel one layer, another layer. And while you do the peeling, you're telling stories. And this is the same thing that I did with my aunt, I did with my grandma. And so it was just lovely to be able to repeat that with an old friend. Next.
Mei, I'm going to go back really quick because we had a question about what these greens on the right side of this table were.
That's garlic chive.
Oh, okay. Oh, and to the right of the cabbage, so the one above it as well.
That's snow pea vines.
Oh, okay.
豆苗. It's a vine for growing snow peas, but you only take the tip of it. You can find these in normal like Ranch 99, these Asian markets. You can find a bundle maybe in a plastic bag. Most of the time, when you take it home, you have to use your fingertip, use your nails to test it. And I would discard almost half of what I get from the supermarket. You only get the very tender tip. And the ones from the supermarket have like 3 inches extra that you have to toss out. Otherwise, it becomes very stringy after you fry it.
Ah, okay. Cool. Okay, thanks. Oops, sorry.
Sure.
Go on now. Okay, here we are.
So Uncle Yang also, a way to show generosity is to use more meat. And so I gave him a chunk of my meat and he's like, no, I have mine. So he fetches from his wall whatever was hanging there and he cut way too much of this ham. It's delicious, but it's so salty. This beautiful dish became very salty, but you can see that just to show his hospitality, it really doesn't matter what the flavor is. So he used the garlic scape from his field. The ham is from his wall, and the dried chili, he probably dried that himself, and he uses so much chili. It's a very tasty dish. Just, I wish next time he should have the ham quantity. You do that when you cook for yourself. Okay, so that's just an example of the kind of characters that I wrote about in my book. I think there are about 12 of them in total. But the interesting thing, I'm going to leave you now. Interesting thing is I gave the same talk at a food conference. It's called the Southern Food Alliance, SFA, based in Tennessee. And it's in the American South, talking about soul food, like the Southern food of America. It's in the Cajun food and those sort of things, right? So I went there and I thought they were very courageous to invite someone from the south of China to talk about food. But the most interesting thing was like, I'm talking about Southern food of China. They are talking about Southern food of America. And yet when I was done with my talk, one of the gentlemen in his early 70s came up to me and said, Mei, I'm so happy to meet you. My name's Alan Benton. And everyone's like, oh, Alan, everyone knows him except me. He is the ham king of Tennessee. And he told me, he said, the way you showed how you guys make ham is exactly the same. We do it, except he has a factory and they do it year round. So there's no seasonality because they have refrigeration. And instantly I was sort of like, embraced into this Southern food family in America. And this warm hospitality felt very much the same. And after the conference, 2 weeks later, I got home. He sent me this beautiful, like 32 months old aged ham for me. And as a gift to remember the ham making affinity. And the thing I want to say is there's something unusual, something about the land, the food, and the people that are similar across the world. I experienced a very similar kind of hospitality in Corsica, in France. Again, it's mountain people. They also tell me in France and Switzerland, they make ham in very similar ways. There's something about mountain people that has this warmth towards each other and sometimes towards strangers that I think sustains the kind of life in the mountains. And I find that beautiful. I'm not an anthropologist. If I can probe this deeper, it's very interesting to me. Now, I forgot what these are called. This is a type of wild onion. And why am I showing you this? Is for Yunnan food, we came a full circle from the time when I was there, in the early 90s, when Yunnan was just this landlocked poverty and barbaric, primitive. Those were the adjectives that we used for Yunnan. And now you go to Beijing, Shanghai, Yunnan food is very hip. They have the nice restaurants. Even in New York, I think Yunnan food is catching this new, it becoming fashionable kind of a food item or cuisine. And I think there is a trend of returning to roots, returning to a more traditional lifestyle that is not just in China. I'm also showing you this as I've seen it here in the States as well. Because also at the conference, a young lady who's a professor teaching somewhere in Florida, she came up to me and told me the story. And she said she was from the Appalachian Mountains. And growing up, it was always embarrassing because her family would cook this kind of wild onion and ham and rice kind of a dish for her to take to school, put in the lunchbox. And in order to keep it warm, she would put it near the radiator. And at lunchtime, once she opens it up, it smells. And that smell to her is the country pumpkin. I call it pumpkin. I know it's country pumpkin. Sort of character of her upbringing. It's embarrassing, right? It's a scar that she carried with her, stigma she carried with her for a long time. And until she grew way, she studied very hard and left to the Appalachian Mountains and did her PhD and became a professor. Her father came to visit her, and she took her father to Whole Foods to shop. And her father pulled her and said, come, look at this. And they came to this bundle of wild onion, and it's labeled, it's mountain foraged wild onion, $19.99 a pound. Her father couldn't believe it. It's like, it's free, it's everywhere in the mountains, and it's like so expensive at Whole Foods. And she was telling me the same story to say, yes, there is value in things from the land. And if you stay close to it, it's actually pretty nourishing. That brings me to the closing, the end. This is my favorite quote. Marcel Proust said, "The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeing new sights, but in looking with new eyes." And I hope after today's talk, all of us will have a chance to look at wherever you are from, with new eyes. Thank you. I went way over time.
No, that was great. So interesting. If anyone has any questions, feel free to type them in. I'll start off with a couple, but I don't want to take up all the time. So I'll start with the questions we had pre-submitted, actually, just to make sure we get to those. So the first one was from Bruce Austin, who I know is here. And he was wondering where can one procure a similar ham here in the US, or do you simply have to go to China? So I know on one of your slides, you mentioned that ham. Is that something that people can get in the US? Yes. They can order. Is that one that you would say is very similar? Like if you cooked the same dish with that ham, would it be similar to the Yunnan ham, or very different? I
think if you buy Alan's ham, actually buy the younger ones, because he was curing them. He added a smoking process to it. And so if you buy the very old ham, like the one he gave me, 32 months old, you're better off eating like the Spanish style, just carve off to go with your dates or wine, in a more Western style. But for stir fry, you want to buy his younger ham, like 8-9 months old younger ham. It's called Alan Benton's Country Ham in Tennessee. But last year when I tried to buy one, I think for another friend of mine, he actually told me they ran out. They don't have these whole legs anymore. You could only buy packages of it. Maybe that's all you need anyway. It's a bit difficult to deal with an entire leg. You have to take it to the butcher for them to saw it open for you. The reason they got into shortage of ham was because the shortage of growing pigs because of COVID. So check. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, awesome. So the website again is just Benton's Tennessee Country Ham.
I think you have to look it up.
Okay, I'll put it in the follow-up email for everyone. No worries. Yeah. Cool. Okay, so then I also want to circle back to the foraging because I know you touched on that, but that was one of my questions. So I was really excited you brought it up. But yeah, exactly as you were saying, I feel like foraging has become so trendy. Like you see it in like Michelin star restaurants, you see it on MasterChef, and in China, and specifically in your book in Yunnan, you have this idea of farm to table, of foraging as just sort of the root of the culture. It's something that people have been doing for so long. So I know you talked about mushrooms, but I'm wondering if you can talk about like seasonality for foraging, like when people should go, and if there's any sort of common things that people forage for in Yunnan or that you could go forage for?
Yes. So Yunnan people forage year round.
Okay.
Because I think foraging is the closest you come to living with the land, with the season, right? So whatever is available, you turn to the mountain to look for a living. And that has been an art that Yunnan people perfected at. So in spring, once little fresh things are sprouting off the ground, you forage for ji cai, which is a kind of tender green little, it's delicious, this vegetable, but now it's also cultivated. It's a little bit like arugula, but it doesn't quite have the bitter taste. And so you can forage that. And we also eat dandelion greens, the very fresh ones, and quite a few others. And even you can pick the tips of pine trees. I know it sounds very pungent, but if you pick the tips of the pine needles, you can make a blanch it and make a salad of that. That's possible as well. And what else? And of course, later in the spring, all the pear blossoms, rhododendron blossoms, we forage those, we eat all of those as well. And fiddleheads, a kind of fern, we forage those, right? Starting from June to October, you forage mushroom. And after that, it's all sorts of berries, and raw pear, wild pears, ginger, you can forage in the forest. I think winter is probably the only time you kind of stay put and start curing meat.
Okay, yeah. Awesome. So Jennifer Cow asks, what's the best time to enjoy the wild mushroom feast in Yunnan? Is that just any time during that foraging season that you mentioned? Yeah,
I would say if you want the fresh ones, from June to end of September is the best time. But it comes with that is there's one drawback. The reason mushroom grows so well is because it rains so much. So you just have to take both. And because mushroom really explodes on the warm day after the rain. Like when the sun comes out the next day after the rain, and that's when mushroom just like go crazy. But in Yunnan, you can pretty much eat mushroom year round because they freeze a lot of the wild ones as well. I know my aunt has a few bundles in her freezer waiting for me to get there.
That sounds awesome. Okay, cool. So I have another question. This one, I think you probably see this one coming because I always talk about this, but my favorite food and one of my favorite foods in Yunnan, which is cheese, which somehow you skipped in your presentation. I feel cheated.
That's right.
But this is so cool to me because in like obviously Chinese restaurants in the West, most Chinese restaurants, cheese is not something that you would ever see on the menu. Obviously, a lot of the food is, stuff that's been Americanized, but cheese just seems so non-Chinese for I think a lot of Western people. So it was really cool when I first went to Yunnan. I remember seeing it like just in street side sort of food stalls in Dali, and then in Tiger Leaping Gorge, they made like dumplings out of yak cheese that you dipped in honey, and it was just totally different from anywhere else in China that I'd been. So you also talk about this in your book, but I'm wondering, first of all, why is cheese part of Yunnan cuisine? Like, where did it come from? And then secondly, is it found anywhere else in China? Like, is cheese, I've never seen it, but is there cheese as part of any other province's cuisine? And third part, so it's a three-part question. How many different types of cheese are there in Yunnan, like different preparations? I know you talked about at least 3 in your book. So yeah, sorry, that was a loaded one.
Okay, there are many. And by the way, in the meantime, you may want to fix the spotlight, but it doesn't matter. So Yunnan has cheese. It's one of the finds that people go into Yunnan go like, what? It's because of Yuan dynasty. Right, when the Mongolians were marching across the northern plains, but they also went into Tibet and then from Tibet and came down, so brought all the cheese making traditions with them. So in mountains of Yunnan, in Bai people in particular, this is about as southern cheese as you'll probably find. In my book, I actually visited one of these ladies in her village in Shaxi, in her house, and she showed us how to milk. She actually just took cow milk to make it, but in Yunnan we make it with cow milk, goat milk. Cheese is very popular, and it's very quick process. It's simply add whey, and when you are boiling it, and then fish out the top and use a mold to squeeze out the liquid, and it becomes this very fresh kind of like a cross between ricotta and mozzarella. It's not very salty. So in Yunnan, the ways to prepare that is, it looks like a little brick. You slice it, and you can pan fry it and sprinkle some salt and pepper on it, and that's a simple dish. That's probably a favorite dish. Or you can dice it up in little chunks and fry that with fava beans. And in my book, it's a very by her own recipe sort of thing. She made it sweet, which I had actually never seen that, but it was another way. So I'm sure locals have different ways of cooking it. Now from Yunnan, you can go further north into from Lijiang, Dali, Lijiang, you can go further north into Shangri-La, which is Tibetan area. There you have very different cheese. Cheese there are more dried so that they stay longer, and they are preserved in these beautiful baskets for a long period of time. And those are a little bit like salty European cheese, but with a little more pungent. They use yak milk to do that, or cow milk to do that as well. So those are the 2 areas that I can think of that eat cheese in Yunnan. But in China,
Oh, Mei, I think we lost you. Uh-oh. Oreo, can you see Mei, or is it frozen for you too?
Yeah, I cannot see.
Okay. Okay, I think we might have lost her. Okay, well, I guess, I mean, we're out of time. So no, I think it's Mei. She's in a quarantine hotel with not great Wi-Fi. It's hard to imagine poor Wi-Fi, but seems to be the case. So cool. Well, I think we will end there because we're out of time anyways. So I just want to thank everyone for coming, for listening, for participating. Sorry, we ran out of time. We didn't have time for a lot of questions, but if you have any questions, please feel free to email them to me or Mei, and we'll get back to you. And if you want to follow Mei's quarantine on social media, she's been posting about it. So you can follow her on Instagram at WildChina Mei, or you can follow WildChina on Instagram, as we've been reposting all of that as well. Next month, for our next book club and last book club of the year, we're reading a mystery. It's called Inspector Chen and the Private Kitchen Murder by Chou Xiaolong. If you want to sign up for this event, you can go to our website. And if you want to hear about all future events, please sign up for our newsletter. And lastly, we have a new podcast. Actually, it's not new anymore, but we have a podcast called the China Travel Podcast. So if you're interested in podcasts or listening to any of that, we encourage you to check it out. And that's all. So thank you guys so much for coming, and have a nice rest of your day. And I'm sure Mei says goodbye from wherever she went. So thank you. Thank you. Have a nice rest of your evening or day, wherever you are.